like to welcome everyone to this Wild Ventures webinar. We're going to be talking about finding your first sales hire, which is one of the things that we at Wild Ventures spend a lot of time on with all of our portfolio companies. A really key piece of the puzzle to building out a great cybersecurity business. My name is John Brennan. I'm a partner here at Wild Ventures. For those of you who don't know, although I think most of you do, we're a seed stage venture firm. We invest in only one kind of company, and that is Israeli cybersecurity companies at the seed stage. I'm very lucky and honored to be here today with Jonathan Langer and Tyson Hempel from our portfolio company Medigate. And before we kick things off with some Q&A, I'm going to allow each of them to introduce themselves. Maybe Jonathan, you can go first.
Thank you, John. Hey, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm Jonathan Langer. I'm the CEO of Medigate. I've been working with Tyson on the sales side for 2.5 years now, so I'm looking forward to a good conversation here.
Thanks, John. Everybody, Tyson Hempel, EVP of Global Sales here at Medigate, and I'm excited to be here. I've been with Medigate, Jonathan and the founders really since the inception. So excited about the conversation today.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So I do want to remind the audience, we've actually already had some great questions submitted that we've already sprinkled in throughout the presentation, so we'll be answering those. But please feel free to ask questions live if it's something you've already got top of mind, or maybe it's something reacting to some of the stuff we're talking about. You can submit them via the Q&A tab on Zoom. We'll see them and we'll answer as many of them as possible. So please interact and make this an interactive process. So I want to start out here. I want to go way back in time. And this is going to start here with Jonathan, and then we're going to go to Tyson. I remember what it was like in late 2017, shortly after Medigate was founded, and we backed it with some seed capital. And I'd like to ask Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about what that sales process was like and what customer engagement was like with the team based in Israel with no sales professionals? Talk to me a little bit about that experience and how you engaged with customers successfully without someone like Tyson on board.
Thank you, John. So it was definitely a challenge doing so. And I think that most importantly, I would say that the objective of the sales and engagement at that point was very different than it is today. At that point in time, basically what I was doing wasn't exactly sales. It was more about evangelizing the technology in order to get direct market feedback that would validate the product market fit and get us some engagement that we could then quickly convey back to the product and R&D team to really crystallize the messaging and to get some momentum. That was what I was doing. Where it really lacked, and this was one of the great areas where Tyson added obviously tons of value, was really to be able to close deals rather than just having conversations, and to get a good process and methodology in place that would make it scalable and actionable and drive a good pipeline. So I think there was really two different objectives between let's call it the pre-Tyson and the post-Tyson phase. So that would be my comment there.
That's great. That's great. And I definitely want to get into some of those specifics. But before that, I also want to talk to Tyson because, we're always talking about from the company's perspective, but there is a relatively limited universe of amazing salespeople out there in cybersecurity. And so I think it's important for people to hear, Tyson, you had a really interesting career pre-Medigate. Can you talk a little bit about what you were looking for as someone looking to take the next step in your career when you found Jonathan?
Yeah, you bet. So my career really technology, and I've been in technology about seven and a half years now, was more focused around finance, but in these organizations still on the customer facing and sales side. As I got into technology and started getting interested in technology, I was with a couple of publicly traded companies, large corporate organizations, Commvault and Proofpoint. And while that was a great way for me to learn, I wasn't really fulfilled from a career perspective and wasn't a great fit for my personality. And I always thought that maybe a smaller organization, a startup, with some innovative technology and much more faster pace, it would be a good fit. And was with a couple of organizations, one being a YL Ventures portfolio company in Hexadite. And that was really the catalyst for me to understand that this was going to be a great fit. And then I was lucky enough to get the chance to help run this organization when Jonathan and the team got funded.
Great. Great. And so now I want to dig in a little bit. So Jonathan, you talked about early on your kind of doing customer discovery, exploration, but at the same time, of course, you're trying to sell something, and in some cases, a product that isn't yet built. So when did you know, or when did you feel that it was time to bring in someone full-time to take on this responsibility?
Well, I guess when people stopped taking my calls, but I'm just kidding. I think that it was really apparent that we need to get a full-time salesperson, sales leader to build up an organization when, after having, let's say, 2-3 engagements where we felt that there was something that at least is initially sellable, and that we could anticipate that we could really go to market in the next 3 to 6 months, we knew that in order to get ahead of that, we need to bring someone on board ASAP. And we did that, and I think that it was great advice that we got from the board to start very early around this. I would definitely recommend that to any startup. But what we really needed to do so that that salesperson would have something to start off with is really just a good feeling around the overall messaging in the very initial product that we had at that point. Once we hit that, and I think it took us probably 2, 3, 4, 5 accounts that really showed interest, that's where I decided we're going to make this higher, even though it's very early. Let's push the pedal.
Great. So, I think what you're saying is a critical mass of real customer engagement, 2 to 5 deep engagements that eventually you start to see kind of the dollars at the end of the road, and you need someone really who does this for full time to come in and manage. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, as much as it was exciting for me to do that engagement by myself, in order to close deals and large enterprise deals, you need a professional. You need someone that does this all day long. You definitely need someone in the United States. It's hard to do this from Israel, and it would definitely be something that when I look back, I think it was a really good decision.
That's great. And of course, I would have to agree that it was a great decision and a great find. And I want to ask Tyson, so, from the company's perspective, 2 to 5 accounts, real engagement, that sounds great. But, there are a lot of early stage cybersecurity companies out there. So Tyson, what was it about Medigate and Jonathan and the team that got you comfortable that was enough to bring someone like you on? It's obviously at that stage quite a risky bet for you.
Yeah, so I could go on for a long time here, but to keep it in light of time. So, first off, when I met Jonathan and Atai, I knew that they were on to something, and I had a gut feeling from being with a past company around IoT, focusing on healthcare around connected medical devices was certainly a big gap. And so, as when I met these guys, I think that's also a lot about synergy. So I felt like the market was certainly ripe. I felt like the product, if we could develop it, would be substantial. And then certainly just, even from the day that I met these guys, it was very open communication. And I really felt comfortable with these guys. And I think, once we engaged and began our journey, I think, open communication lines, being able to pivot very quickly, taking these early stage engagements, even before you're driving revenue, to understand and define your messaging and really define the platform and which direction the product's going. And I think Medigate, other than many other organizations, has been really successful there, with Jonathan and the founders and the developers, taking feedback from me, from our early stage engagement with the marketplace here in the U.S. and really defining some use case deliverables that we could monetize.
Great, great. And, something you mentioned there, Tyson, a couple of times, which I think is worth emphasizing, is openness and communication. And what's implied there is trust. And, you can academically do a market sizing analysis. You, Tyson, can go talk to some CISOs. You, Jonathan, can go talk to a bunch of recruiters. But that's more softer piece, that trust, is only earned over time and through a lot of at-bats. And I think that's really critical in building that relationship to put you both in a position where you're comfortable partnering, in the case of our portfolio companies, from, up to 10 time zones away.
Agreed.
Absolutely agreed.
So, we just got an interesting question in from the audience. So I do want to address it. Now, it's going to take us maybe a half a step back. But it has to do with something you talked about, Jonathan, and Tyson. You'll probably have an opinion on this as well. But how would you advise early stage companies on conducting their market validation in the U.S. in the current atmosphere? And that, of course, being where it's going to be very remote, potentially, with no one in the U.S. What's your advice? And maybe we'll start with Jonathan, because you did live this, although you were able to travel, of course. What would your advice be for a company starting right now doing that validation?
That's a really good question, actually. I had the luxury of doing this market validation in person through numerous meetings that John, you were able to help me out with, and which was great. Doing it remotely is more of a challenge. What I would say, but of course it is possible. So what I would say to that is, although sharpening the message and the presentation is also very important for an in-person meeting, it would definitely be even more important for a remote meeting where you don't entirely have the attention of that person. So really every word matters, and I would also keep things even more concise than I would in person. And the second thing that I would recommend, which is also somewhat of a challenge, is since you don't really have the quality of an in-person meeting, I would go to quantity. So instead of doing 5 CISOs, I would try to get 10, because probably half of them aren't really going to listen. They're going to be they're going to do other things or multitask, and you won't necessarily have all of their attention. So the compensating piece would probably be to get a couple more.
I think that's great, and that last point especially, you kind of have to operate in the reality in which you're in, and sometimes you can take a situation like this and turn it to your advantage. So here you have more capacity to get more people's time to do more calls. Of course, you can't kind of be in person, show up at the office, build that super close personal relationship, but there actually are maybe new opportunities with the right resources to drive that discovery process early, especially when revenue doesn't matter so much. That input is really, really valuable in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And what about you, Tyson? This is a new reality for you as well. I know you guys are no longer in the customer discovery phase, but what's your perspective on this and maybe engaging with customers broadly in this environment?
Yeah, so, obviously this is a new reality, and I think one thing that Jonathan and I have sort of set the standard at Metagate, and I think it's worked well, is even though we're all remote right now and you don't have the luxury of building really close relationships, being across the table or going to dinner or whatever to really try to understand people, is still looking at it from showing up and shaving and putting a dress shirt on, looking at it just like you would in normal times. And I think having it as sort of 101 as this sounds, I think having a solid internet connections and being able to see and interact people even over WebEx I mean, as remedial as that sounds, I think it's really important, and we've really taken the steps to address the new reality, just like we would see across from an executive in normal times.
Yeah, and again, some of that advice seems almost obvious or basic, but it's actually critical. I mean, you only get one shot at a lot of these conversations, and so things like internet connection actually do make a big difference. And I think I had an old manager at Accenture that used to tell me, you can screw up in a lot of ways, but don't miss the layups. And I think that's a little bit of what you're saying. You got to take care of the basics to optimize your chances for success.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, I'm going to get back on track with my initial train of thought, because I still want to talk about, Jonathan, how you thought about bringing on this first hire. And I'd love to hear you share a little bit about what kind of profile you were looking for. And of course, there's more kind of tangible attributes, some softer ones. How were you thinking about the kind of person that you were going to bring in before you had Tyson right in front of you?
So that's a great question, and for me, this is my first time CEO. So everyone was giving me advice about this, and cautioning me that this is probably the most important decision that I would have to make in the seed round. Which, by the way, it is. I would totally agree with that statement. And really, for me, just listening to all the advice that I was giving and doing, of course, thinking of my own, the profile that I was looking for was execution oriented. That would be the number one piece. A salesperson that first and foremost can close deals, because that's what you need to do in the seed round. You have to close deals, and you have to get traction, and you have to get excitement from the market, because that's ultimately what you're going to build your A round on. And once you get the funding, the clock is ticking. So that for me was very important. And what that means, and this goes back to those, I guess, softer attributes that you were talking about, John. It's about energy. It's about really good communication between you and that person, that synergy or that chemistry between that person, and really running together to begin with. You would also want your sales leader to be able to stay on the team and build a team afterwards. So I would definitely also recommend identifying a quality in a person that would allow him to build up a team, build up a sales process, train individuals in the team that would work under him. All of that is incredibly important as well. But if there's one quality that you're looking for, it's execution and actually being able to close deals. That was my profile that I was looking for, and looking back, I would recommend that.
That's excellent, and music to my ears. I couldn't agree more. And luckily, with Tyson here, we've got someone who could do both and has done both. I got another great question from the audience, and the reason I know it's great is I already had a version of this written down. So, and I think this is going to be for Jonathan. What would be your recommendation on building a sales team? And specifically, should it be done top down with a VP, C-level person first, or bottom up, starting with maybe some AEs to help the founders close deals? I've actually got thoughts of my own, but first I'd love to hear from you, Jonathan.
So the way that I would build it, it is a really good question, I think. I would say that it's somewhere in the middle. I would say that you have to identify to begin with I'd call it a player manager, meaning that first and foremost, it's someone that can act as a rep, because when you have one person on the team, one person on the sales team, he's a rep. And honestly, as CEO, I like to say that I was the first SE. So it was me and Tyson running around the United States to begin with. Tyson doing the selling, me supporting him technologically, or one of the other founders supporting him technologically, and that's what you need. It's something that you need in your sales leader, and I think it's also something that you need in your CEO or one of the other founding members of the team. However, going back to the previous question, I would also want that person that I'm building kind of bottom up. I really would like to identify at least the potential of him being able to lead the sales organization. And that's exactly what happened with Tyson. I knew that he had that bottom-up quality, being able to sell and being able to act as an excellent salesperson. But at the same time, we also very much saw the potential of Tyson growing into a leadership position, which he did so successfully.
Absolutely. And, I really agree, that, and going back to what you said earlier, Jonathan, it's so important that this first sales hire is a hustler, will go out and close deals, has the aggressiveness and the humility to really get the company to that next milestone. And then you hope that they can grow into a great leader as well. A big risk is if you bring in someone too senior who needs a large team beneath them already. In a lot of cases, that's not the right profile for this stage of the company. Tyson, related, so how would you think about that? So you came in, things were very green, things were very fresh. What are the pros and cons to bringing in a great leader when it's completely greenfield and maybe there is no organization in place or very little organization in place beyond the founders, versus already having some cogs in the wheel? Maybe they're not your salespeople, but they're good reps. How do you think about that and joining a new opportunity?
Well, look, I think you guys, hit the nail on the head. I think, looking back at Medigate and a very early stage seed round company where you're still really trying to define your messaging and the platform, obviously you have an idea and you're building on it. You can't have an ego. And, really my goals for that initial year or really after we defined very clearly what the board and our investors and what Jonathan expected, was very clear, and it took a lot of energy. I think you had to. I think one needs to be able to pivot and have very open communication lines with product and the founder and the investors. I think leveraging everything you have to get your first few engagements. From a network perspective, I mean, we sort of have a saying here at Medigate that it, quote unquote, takes a village, and it does. Jonathan was to his point, he was not only my SE, but he was also another sales rep. And so just kind of remove that humility. And once you're able to get 2 or 3 or 4 engagements, and really, take your lessons learned from every single meeting, then you can start talking about, monetizing your product. And I think one thing we did really well at Medigate was, very quickly exceed expectations for that first year, and then start driving revenue to get to that A round and really be able to start scaling the organization.
That's great. And you mentioned scaling the organization. So I'm going to take another question we just got from the audience, and this one is for Tyson. So what are your insights? What can you share about building out your own team in the U.S.? So you came in a situation where, of course, you had to get to that initial revenue. But then the next challenge was, okay, Tyson can only do so much, just like Jonathan and the founders can only do so much. So how did you think about that? And with really a lot of creative control about how to build out that organization?
Yeah. So good question. Look, as we all know, I think hiring is one of the hardest things to do, and one of the most important things. You make the wrong hire and you spend 3, 6, 9 months, and it doesn't work. You've just lost a lot of time and momentum and groundwork there. And so for me, I really so to answer both pieces, some of the challenges were to convince successful sales folks to leave a stable job or to leave an organization where they had already built a book of business and to come to work for a startup with very little to no revenue. We were lucky we had a couple of large deals and we're starting to get a lot of momentum, but we were still, in infancy, and so was the market. So trying to convince folks that have had some success in their career. I think what was really key for what I was looking for, and I think Jonathan would agree, is finding someone with like a killer attitude. And what I mean by that is someone who can wear a lot of hats, who hustles every day, who can build pipeline. They have a pure winning attitude. they're a team player, and they can go. I mean, we expect a lot out of our sales folks. They work hard. We press them pretty heavily from expectations. And we were really lucky with our first hire in the East, a gentleman named Paul Goldweitz, who not only checks all of those boxes, but on top of that, he really understands how to run a strategic executive level sales campaign while he continues to build pipeline, while he continues to drive energy into the marketplace, into the early stage channel environment. And so we were really, really fortunate. And I think, those 3 or 4 qualities are really key.
That's great. And here's a question for both of you. And, this could be sales specific or not. But, you mentioned hiring and how hard it is. We'll stick with Tyson and go over to Jonathan. How has that changed in the current environment? Has that been a challenge? Is that something you're dealing with?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's always a challenge to make the right hire. And I think it's everyone, when you're interviewing, is going to put that, they're going to tell you they're the best in the business, et cetera. Especially, they're salespeople too. So they're probably pretty good at trying to convince somebody of whatever the agenda is. It has changed, however, obviously because of our traction in the organization is becoming much more well-known. The market is certainly developing. I wouldn't call it mature yet, but I would call it maybe an adolescence. But Metagate's name's out there. We have a team of about 11 or 12 folks within the sales organization, between regional directors and inside support and lead gen, and then we have a champ. And so our name's out there. And so I think it's become easier to attract more talent, certainly. But I think from identifying, the qualities that we believe in a regional director or an executive level sales lead or executive level salesperson, I mean, I think those qualities are still pretty parallel from the beginning. Somebody that's a team player, somebody that can articulate not a technical message, but a business message to executives in a way that they understand how they can make money, save money, and mitigate risk. Somebody that doesn't get stuck in the weeds technically, and then just somebody that is a team player that leverages all of their resources and has no ego. And I think those are the folks. If we can look at our really successful sales folks here at Metagate, we have a couple of really, really wonderful, talented folks here, and our whole team is very talented. And I think looking back, those boxes are checked across the board.
Yeah, it's great. And Tyson, I keep hearing from both you and Jonathan, whenever we ask about the qualities we're looking for in someone, there's stuff like managing pipeline, and of course you need to execute. But so many of the key characteristics for hires, especially at a small company, at a startup, are softer in nature and around hustle and humility and really the willingness to put the company ahead of themselves. And I've heard it in all of your answers so far, and I think it's important to call out because, again, if you're kind of looking at a LinkedIn profile, that might not that story might not shine through until you get to meet and spend some time in person. Jonathan, how about you with hiring in this environment?
Hiring, as Tyson said, is always hard. In this environment, it's probably a little bit harder, given the fact that you can't meet face to face. But I will say that I don't think that it's or I'll say this. I think for hiring a sales VP, it is significantly harder. I don't know how I would select a VP without meeting him. That's a huge challenge because all of those softer qualities that we're talking about, and the interaction and the chemistry, really hard to understand over the phone. So that would be a challenge. In terms of other employees, other sales employees in the company, I think it's less of a challenge because these are things that as you build up a sales organization, you're going to do a lot of this remotely as well because sales is always busy. So getting Tyson or myself to meet a rep, to meet a potential candidate that's going to be challenging regardless. And we've done some hires, I think, without meeting some people on the team without even meeting them in terms of organizations pre-COVID. But the biggest challenge would definitely be on the VP positions. I don't envy anyone doing that today. I just, the only advice would be do multiple calls and get that quantity factor in place.
I think that makes sense. And even before this pandemic, there's still the challenge of Israeli cybersecurity companies now hiring people in the U.S. And so there's some additional challenges there. Tyson, how did you think about that? So was it a pro? Was it a con? Was it neutral? Like, what were you thinking when you were approached with this opportunity to work with Israeli technologists?
So good question. So this was I was lucky, and this was Metagate's my third Israeli company. But, sort of coming in and taking a leadership position. And if anyone in the U.S., if there's a stereotype that they're difficult to work with, I would say that's absolutely not true whatsoever. All three of the organizations that I've been with, Hexadite, Armis, and Metagates, I've been very, very close to the founders. They've been nothing but supportive of me, both personally and professionally. Metagate especially, I mean, we have a really special team here and culture here, and I think this is one of the reasons we've been really successful, and we keep it really near and dear to our hearts to keep that culture as it is, and I think that's a challenge as you scale. But look, the Israelis that I've been lucky enough to work with have not only been wonderful humans, they've been amazingly innovative. They move very, very quickly. And on top of that, I think one reason why Jonathan and I have had such a good run together and hopefully many more years to come here is that also just like the winning attitude. And I think that's really instilled in Israeli culture. And if you've ever been to Tel Aviv, you sort of feel that energy. They're not afraid. And, I think that's 3/4 of the battle when you wake up in the morning. If you just believe and just a winning attitude, like, losing is not an option. I think that's, I think that's huge.
That's great. And Jonathan, was that something you thought a lot about in your hiring process or in your hiring processes generally, kind of the importance of making sure that culture fit is strong with each hire, especially on the executive level?
Absolutely. I think that there are two things that are really important to me as I make those hires. Besides looking at the individual and the qualities and the experience that he has, one would be that mentality that Tyson was talking about, the winning mentality, the losing is not an option mentality, and really work hard culture. And that's something that a lot of the people here in Israel have, and certainly there are a lot of sales leaders and other people and other organizations in the U.S. that have that mentality, and that's always something that I'm looking to validate. The other thing, which is of course always a challenge in terms of multicultural, multinational challenge or multinational culture that you want to make sure you have covered, is making sure that in terms of process, you have a good line of communication between both sides of the ocean. It seems very trivial, but when you're moving very fast, it's nothing but trivial. And if there's a good advice that I could give to anyone building up their team, and it's not just about the individual that you're hiring, it's about the organization as a whole, make sure that the continents are communicating in a very organized and thoughtful way. Otherwise, there are so many valuable things, very detail-oriented, that you're going to lose. And in the beginning, I think probably also later, but certainly in the beginning, the devil's in the details. When you're looking to get the market feedback and you're looking to get everything, every word matters. So I would definitely highlight that communication.
That's great. That's great. And we've got so many great questions here. I'm going to get to as many as possible. Please, the audience, feel free to keep sending them in. I mean, these are really phenomenal. I'm going to mash a couple of questions together into a really important topic that we talk about at Wild Ventures with every single one of our portfolio companies at some point. sales is not built in a bubble. Of course, you've got other teams involved, and another part of the organization that needs to be built up, generally simultaneously with sales, also U.S. facing in most cases, is the marketing organization. And so I'm going to start with Jonathan. How did you think about balancing those priorities, your bandwidth, your ability to hire, the ability to invest resources and support the teams? When you thought about starting your sales and marketing organizations, what came first, and how did you think about that?
Well, that's a really good question. First, I'd say as a general approach, and this was something that the board was always supportive of, and I took their advice on that, I would start sales and marketing early. I know that that's not always the perception, not always the choices that all companies make, but at least in cybersecurity, at least for Medigate, that was good advice. In terms of the order in which I would do that, the approach that I took, which I think was good, is sales a little bit before marketing, maybe 1 or 2 quarters before marketing. And the reason being is the way that we did things in the seed round is you got to get a good achievement, closing an account, getting momentum, meeting people in the field. And then marketing basically, after you bring them in, amplifies that achievement. So if you get a good first account and maybe they do a reference, then you have something to shout out about. Or maybe you get a good partnership that you leverage from the field. But it's those small wins that you leverage into strategic wins through marketing amplification. So again, just to highlight that, it's sales, and just one step afterwards is marketing. That would be my approach.
That's great. And Tyson, so how do you think about that? Because, of course, you're working hand in hand with marketing from the very beginning. In some cases, if there is no one in marketing, the salesperson is the de facto marketer as well. Well, how do you view that from your perspective, and what's a good way to approach that really early on?
Yeah, no, it's another good question. I think, I think it kind of goes back to the comments we've made, how important those first few engagements are, and taking market feedback and being able to pivot, even if it's small, or maybe it's a major turn in the direction of the product or the messaging, but really leveraging your first few engagements, even if it's a POC, great if it's a paying customer, but to get some references, get some logos, but then really start understanding what the needs are of that organization or target markets, to start defining the messaging that you can start pushing out into the marketplace to help drive pipeline and ultimately revenue. And so I think it absolutely goes hand in hand. I think it goes back to it takes a village and open communication lines, and really being able to move fast, just to leverage what the market's telling you. And I think Medigate's done an incredible job of following the market and not just staying, focused or tunnel vision on what the initial idea was, but driving the product and the messaging to where there's real value within healthcare systems.
That's great. And I really do think every company is different. And so there are cases where we think marketing is needed to come in earlier than sales, and vice versa. A lot of times it's based on the founders and their skill sets and what they're strongest at. And I think the way that the Medigate's built up their organization has been a great example of how to do that in the right way. And as Jonathan said, by investing in both very early on. All right, so I want to take a step back, and I want to make sure we might have time for a question or two at the end, but I want to get some advice from both of you, and I want to start with Tyson. Tyson, there are a lot of great founders in cybersecurity in Israel, and if things go the way they hope, there's going to be a lot of companies looking to hire in sales, and generally those are U.S.-based salespeople. What would your advice be to someone looking for the next Tyson? How should they think about building relationships, marketing themselves and their firm to the sales community? What would your advice be to those CEOs thinking, I need a Tyson, how do I find one?
Well, that's really nice. I don't know about I need a Tyson, but to find,
Not Tyson specifically, by the way.
I know.
You're
Yes.
taking.
Look, I think we've talked a lot about hustle and no ego. I think something that is a big strength of my personality is instilling energy, not even in your partners, the founders, but even the board members and the investors, and then your sale. As you grow your sales team, I think that energy is sort of it's an intangible, and I think it's really contagious. I think someone that is not afraid to sort of push the limits and let the founders know and the investors know that, hey, we're not just going to do $1 million this year. We're going to do 2 or 3 million and really push those limits and obviously not be wildly unrealistic, but I think someone that's continuing to push the limits and try to grow the organization. I think somebody that it's not necessarily like, I don't like hiring on black book or experience, but somebody that's not afraid to go, put themselves out there and it's really it's a contact sport, right? I mean, it's getting the message out there. And then I think also just being relentless in terms of following up on every single opportunity as it starts to bubble up. And really just shoot for the stars and being able to juggle a lot of different elements as you're growing a startup. I mean, it's not a large corporation where you have 10 accounts and that's all you have to deal with one SE. You're dealing with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different pressures, and you really have to be able to go out there and deliver some early stage wins for sure.
Thank you. And Jonathan, you've probably got about a minute to answer this, but I'll ask you if you could give one piece of advice to CEOs in a similar position to that which you were in late 2017, early 2018. What would it be?
It would be try to find a candidate that is execution oriented and that can close deals. And number 2, since it's so hard to do and it's so hard to find the right person for yourself, try to leverage introductions or people that had already worked with that individual and really get good references. Those would be the 2 key things that I would say.
Great. Thank you. So we're about out of time here. What I want to do is I want to thank both of you. So Jonathan, Tyson, it's a pleasure to partner with you both as Medigate, but both as people. I think you're both great representations of the kind of CEOs, the kind of sales professionals that we at YL Ventures strive to work with. And so we feel very lucky to have partnered with you very early on to continue to support the company. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on with me today to talk a little bit about this, a really important topic and one on which I get a lot of questions from prospective founders in Israel.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. And I'll wrap up here by saying I apologize to all those in the audience whose questions I did not answer. What I'll offer, though, is if you asked a question, it didn't get addressed, please feel free to shoot me a note at john@ylventures.com. I'm very easy to find. And I'm happy to follow up one-on-one or in another group setting. But this has been really great, guys. I want to thank you both again. And thank you to Sharon and the YL Ventures team for putting together this great webinar.